Okay, actual real talk. I've cooled down quite a bit from my initial rage, at least to a point where I'm more cognitive. I do gotta say though, I'm actually not scripting this video. I've got more of bullet points than anything else because my reaction that spawned this video was so visceral and personal, I just couldn't think of a better way to do it. So LG, you go ahead and take a break for this video. I think I got this solo just because, wow, this was a personal thing. I'm also possibly going to piss off a lot of people. I do not care. This is one of those cases where I'm so very tired of trying to be objectively balanced on both sides when I feel that the other side is completely missing the point of the show. And also, I'm spoiling this entire series, so yeah, there's that. Alright, so I finished Aggretsuko Season 5 the other day. I know I'm a little late to this party, and honestly, I thought it concluded the best way the show possibly could for what it wanted to do. But the thing is, I'm seeing a lot of people coming out just slamming either Season 5, Season 4, and 5 together, or just saying that the show is bad altogether, and oh my god, I was frothing. And the reason being is because I don't think people understand what Aggretsuko is supposed to be versus what they want it to be. Because see, here's the thing, guys. This is not a show about characters. It's a show about commentary. And that's not to say that there isn't good characterization within the show, but my point is that just like how most of Sanrio's characters like Hello Kitty are kind of interchangeable from one theme to another, Aggretsuko is basically a less crass and more cute iteration of South Park, just made in Japan. And just like South Park, this show actually tackles issues from both sides and not really playing any sort of lip service or favoritism for Japanese conservative or liberal perspectives. So I want to go through the entire 5 seasons and kind of point out how and why this show is so much more commentary than characters, because I think when people can understand that, they'll appreciate not only the entire show, but the later seasons way more. Because the thing is that the commentary starts out almost on a minute scale. There's way more of an emphasis on character development than commentary, but starting in about Season 3 or so, that's when it switches around. The commentary becomes more prevalent than the character. And because of that, for Seasons 1 and 2, I kind of want to go by an episode-by-episode basis, and then by 3 through 5, it's way more broad. So let's get started with Season 1. Episode 1, Day in the Life of Retsuko. This is pretty easy to figure out. It's making commentary over the concept of pawahara, or basically power harassment. It's kind of setting the stage over what is going to be happening for the rest of this season, next season, all the way up through, I think, Season 4. But yeah, this is just laying the ground rules of what Retsuko is going through and the base commentary of power harassment. And then that goes into Episode 2, where we're introduced to Puko. And I think this particular episode is kind of pointing out a commentary on startups in Japan and how they're viewed. I would kind of guess back in 2018 when this came out, I think that startup companies were still kind of looked down upon in Japan. Not so much now because of, well, everything that happened from 2020 on. But yeah, I think this is like commentary on how it's equal parts difficult to get a startup company or an individual company going, and how people kind of view others who are trying to start up a new business who aren't already a part of the system. So then we got Episode 4, and this is where Retsuko is going ham about fantasizing about marriage and quitting her job. This is actually a massive setup to the lie of the status quo marriage that's gonna get on way later in the season. So, Episode 5, we've got Washimi and Gori. And I think this particular episode makes commentary on the insane differences of inside and outside office life. You've got Washimi and Gori who are basically untouchable because they're so much higher up in the office ranks compared to Retsuko, but outside of that, yeah, Washimi and Gori eventually become really close friends with Retsuko, and I think all this kind of ties together with a light commentary of tatemae versus honne, which is like the public face versus the actual feelings, but more or less in an office setting. Episode 6, this is where Retsuko tries to suck up to Ton, and it just completely backfires on her. I think this is a universal commentary that anyone from any culture can wrap their brain around. Just the idea of don't suck up to your boss, especially if you're not very good at it, because it's just not gonna end well. But the big thing here is that Ton is actually warned about pawahara, and then because of that starts to become aggressively nice. And it's here we have that big blow up of Retsuko versus Ton that kind of crescendos at karaoke night, and this is when the series starts to introduce the conflict of the young perspective versus the old perspective when it comes to business, office life, things like that. You're looking at someone who has a perspective of a pre-bubble system and a post-bubble system. When I say bubble, I'm talking about the bubble economy that crashed Japan's market in the 90s. Like, Ton lived through the bubble. Like, he saw so much money and success roll in, so he's very hesitant to try and change the way things have been because it's the only thing he's ever known. And because he saw that success, thinks that that's the way things are gonna be. You gotta understand, this is the way that old office people in Japan think and why this is such a huge and important piece of commentary. Because then we have Retsuko, who never lived in the bubble economy, is only 25 years old, and is knee-deep in the third lost decade of Japan's economy. So there's nothing to reflect on to think, oh, well, this is obviously the better way to do it. Tonen's got the better way to do it. He doesn't. And this is gonna come up in season, I think, 3 or so, but hang on to this idea, it's super important for later on. Finally, we got episodes 8 through 10, which focuses squarely on Retsuko's falsified infatuation with Risatsuke. Now, these 3 episodes poke a lot at Retsuko being in denial about Risatsuke, who she calls bland. But have you all ever heard of the concept of Soushoku Danshi? It basically means herbivore men, and it's a bit of a older social issue in Japan. I'd say it kind of peaked in the 2010s. But basically, it's this concept of Soushoku Danshi versus Nikushoku Joshi. So herbivore men versus carnivore women. And the whole concept behind it is that these men just generally lack assertion, they lack ambition, they've been blamed for the low birth rates in Japan during the 2010s. And it's really interesting to me because these men are still interested in relationships and are still passionate about things. That's kind of what made me stop for a minute when it came to Risatsuke, because it's not that he was uninterested. I don't think that he was just going about it because other people necessarily told him to. Because, again, Soushoku Danshi men are still interested in relationships. They're just not hyper-aggressive about it. In fact, you kind of get hit by a double whammy at the very, very end of the season when you discover that Risatsuke actually really loves plants. He goes home by himself, it's really sad, and he just says "Tadaima" to his plants. And I think that's like, it's a commentary, reverse commentary, reverse commentary about this whole concept of relationships in Japan as the 2010s wrapped up in 2018, looking at all of the factors of this sociological issue of Soushoku Danshi and Nikushoku Joshi. I really think too that season 1 also makes a big commentary deal on just how interrelated work and marriage is in Japan, to a point where it's being problematic. Because here's the thing, a lot of women in Japan will not date men if they don't have any real ambition, and that's kind of the issue, quote unquote, with the Soushoku Danshi. On the flip side of that, men are so overburdened in Japan with work that this idea of getting married but never seeing their family, like, there's no point in any of it. You are literally going to work and you're working at least 30 to 40 to 50-hour work weeks. You leave home at 8 o'clock, you come home at 10, and that's if you don't go to a nomikai or karaoke after work or anything like that. It's like, so many men in Japan at this time are like, why bother? There's no reason to do any of that. So, I don't know. It's like, since this came out in 2018, since season 1 came out in 2018, I really do feel like Aggretsuko was trying to get a look at the Soushoku Danshi situation as a whole in the wake of its stigma in the mid-2010s. Alright, season 2. So, riddle me this, everyone. Have you ever heard of omiai? In the most basic sense, they're arranged marriages, but they're not the kind of arranged marriages you might think, where two parties get together and just predetermine that their son and daughter are going to get hitched and they're only like 6 years old. It's a bit more than that. It all starts off with the nakodo, which is kind of the in-between person who decides based on education, socioeconomic status, and family background which kids should possibly hook up. And what eventually happens is that the parents and the children will meet, the children will then go out and then see if they're going to get married. And that sounds kind of, I don't know, I've seen an article call it assembly line. But the funny thing is that despite how old-fashioned this sounds, they still make up for about 30% of marriages in Japan. And with so many in Japan just avoiding relationships and marriage altogether, It's not too surprising that in this particular episode, we see Netsuko's mom trying to intervene way too much in her life and try to push her to actually start a family. And this is back in 2019. Things have gotten significantly worse when it comes to people just not being interested in relationships in Japan. So by the end of the episode, Netsuko is completely flipping out because her mom basically set her up with an omiai against her will. And I think you all can figure out what's going on here with the social commentary. It's just the continuation of the lie of the status quo marriage and how it just doesn't really work anymore. And that, yeah, there are parents out there who are so overbearing that they'll try to get their kids to get married against their will in some instances. But we get more into that in episode 2, continuing the problems of omiai, such as photoshopping pictures of your possible suitor to try and get you to hook up faster. But this is also where we're introduced to the first of the counter commentary that this show has, which takes the form of this new character Anai and the introduction of modern sensitivity issues and maybe even entitlement issues, which brings about the counter commentary on Pawahara. Basically, what happens when Parahara gets pushed back so far with progressionalism that management no longer has control over their employees, where anything that could be taken as harassment is just completely overblown and it in itself turns into harassment. And this kind of crescendos into its lunacy by episode 4, when even Haida's getting pulled in on this whole Anai's paranoid that everyone is just harassing him, and we'll get to that resolution in a minute. But to quickly go back to episode 3, because I know that I literally just skipped it, there is a resolution to the concept of omiai that is being commentated on in this show. And it's kind of interesting because you would expect Netsuko to be pretty okay with not marrying this guy and he ends up with someone else, but it turns out that she's actually kind of having a panic attack because, I don't know, maybe she thinks that this is a missed opportunity. Again, the show is really interesting in that it takes both sides of the story. It's like, it's not just completely slamming on the concept of omiai because it's still being done in Japan. And by showing that Netsuko is actually more paranoid now after that whole experience because she doesn't have that security, the show actually explains that omiai in some cases still works. And then we get to episode 5, and this is the resolution episode of the modern oversensitivity issues, the reverse power harassment issues that is explained through Anai. And it's interesting because all of it is resolved through genuine kindness and patience, in this particular case through kabae, rather than the systematic process of getting a new employee into the job, which is what was introduced as soon as Anai was introduced into the series. Ton sat down with Netsuko and said, all right, train him up. And this is the old way of training new employees. It was the senpai-kohai relationship, but obviously that wasn't going to work here. So I'm actually really fascinated at the commentary of this particular episode that states that you actually need to treat the other person as a person, understanding where they're coming from, because the systematic way of doing things just doesn't really work in the new age. So I know a lot of people were really unhappy that Anai didn't get his just dues, but you gotta understand, that wasn't the point. Anai was not a character to make a commentary about harassing other people and then he falls from grace, gets fired, whatever. That wasn't the point. The idea was to take this concept of this is what new employees are going to be like in Japan going forward. You can't use the old ways anymore to train them up because that's just not how people think anymore. You actually have to care about them as an employee and be patient and be calm and understanding. So then we got episode 6, and it kind of goes back to the concept of omiai, but these are omiai parties, or like speed dating. We all know what this is. And the show is just pointing out again, there's a problem with focusing on the basics of age, occupation, and income, as well as only having a brief amount of time to try and introduce people to each other. You need more time than that. So, I don't know, maybe I'm looking at this too hard, but that episode always struck me as, again, we're talking about how Japan's system of structured dating does not work anymore. Because then this bleeds over into episode 7, where we have even more commentary about the lie of the status quo marriage. And it's so beautiful because the entire episode is punctuated on an example of what a good marriage is. With the example of what a good marriage is coming from Kabae, who tells the story about how she met her husband kind of on a whim, kind of on a fluke. And it's really interesting too because this is also possibly commentary on the dangers of trying to fake who you are in order to get married, going back to that status quo thing, whether it's, oh, well, I need to make a lot of money, oh, I need to be really aggressive, just whatever. All of the fake reasons to get married. For Kabae, it made her suffer so greatly because we all know that Kabae is a humongous blabbermouth. But the fact is that Kabae's future husband, who was the doctor that she was seeing because she was suffocating from not talking, sat there and listened and paid attention. And it's so wonderful because the whole message ends up being find someone for whom you can be comfortable around with your true self, and that it takes two to make a marriage work. Oh my god, I'm about to celebrate my 10-year anniversary with Aki, and I want to take this message and just shove it into the face of literally everyone. Not just people in Japan who are still struggling with this concept of being true to yourself, finding people who make you comfortable being true to yourself, and that it takes two of an effort to make marriage work. It's everyone! I just want to push this to everyone's face like, this is what works! This is what you gotta do! God. And immediately after that, I mean immediately, from episode 8 to 10, we have the Tadano arc. It's really interesting because I thought that Retsuko was going to hook up with Tadano based on this idea of, well, we met kind of at random, but I'm really comfortable around this person. I thought that's what was gonna happen. And that's the thing, is that Retsuko and Tadano really start working well together. And this, I love this. This is where the show just gut punches you with another counter argument. So Tadano doesn't actually care about marriage, and having kids, don't get him started on having kids. And Retsuko freaking dumps him. So now the show is saying that it's actually good to want to get married. That even though there are so many superfluous marriages that exist, plenty are still built on the right aspects of relationship development, and that's kind of what this season feels like. It's taking everything from season 1, this idea of getting married in Japan because it's what you are socially supposed to do, and then making you feel like, okay, well, marriage isn't important, marriage isn't important. Then you have a character that says marriage isn't important, but Retsuko wants to get married, and then the show turns it all back around and saying, wait, no, marriage is actually good. You gotta get married for the right reasons. Capped off with the story of Kabae talking about getting married to someone who makes her feel comfortable for who she is, and the effort that both she and her husband put in. It's just all crescendos up in this second season of actually marriage is still important. We're not trying to say that it isn't. I don't know. I love the commentary of the show. Alright, so now we're going into season 3. And God, I've been doing this for 20 minutes, so I'll try to keep this brief. Seasons 3, 4, and 5, like I said before, it kind of puts the character development on the back end and puts more of the commentary at the front end. And I know that people are saying, well, that doesn't make it better, and I guess that's fine if you're in this show because you want to see the characters develop, but this is when the show really does say, no, it really is about commentary. Because I, like many other people, thought it was really weird that Retsuko would be involved with an idol group. That was such a left field thing that, I don't know. I thought that maybe the show was starting to go downhill, but no, this show is going so many places. So there are two really big overarching things that season 3 is talking about when it comes to the social commentary of Japan. The first one being something that I don't think a lot of people really paid much attention to, and maybe I'm overreaching, but I mean, I've probably been overreaching this entire time, so who cares? I think season 3 points out the importance of innovation with the times. Because a lot of the first part of season 3 is Retsuko being strong-armed into this idol group who cannot turn a profit, but because of her innovation, it actually turns a profit. And she's able to do this because she's actually critically thinking her way to her goal. And one of the biggest criticisms that I think Japan has been facing from the outside in and within itself is that people in Japan tend to have a lack of those critical thinking skills and risk assessment that are associated with it. So I think there's some light commentary on there, but I mean, season 3, we all know what this is about. This is about the toxicity of idol culture. Not in the concept of idol culture in its entirety is bad, but there are so many bad things going on with modern idol culture. For example, we spend a lot of time with the OTM girls off the stage and get a really good inside look at just how dehumanizing idol culture can be to the idols, generating this massive pool of just pure nihilism about everything. One of the things I always told my Japanese friends when I tried to explain to them why I just really don't like idol culture or maid culture or anything like that is because, man, if it's your job to try and make other people happy and be cutesy, that's gonna be the thing that the girl comes to hate because it is their job. And I think in some really good, subtle ways, Aggretsuko sort of makes social commentary on just how awful things can get for idols. I mean, that doesn't even touch on the problem of impoverishment, because so many idols, especially underground idols like the OTM girls, they're broke as heck. And man, then we bring in stalkers and haters that literally want to murder idols. It's just this. I've seen people say that season 3 is when things kind of go bad for the series, but honestly, season 3 is when the commentary really gets even more gut punchy, to the point, and really opens your eyes to just how bad a lot of these social issues in Japan can be. Season 4, in my book, is the counter commentary on old Japan office life. Because like I said before, you've got Ton and the before and after bubble economy. Ton personifies what's called Shushin Koyo. And this was the process of companies picking up freshly graduated students from college and then putting them into lifetime employment. And yeah, you've got basically kind of like a boot camp they have to spend 2 weeks at to learn your job, and then your job is pretty demanding of you and you're never ever expected to quit and go look for other work. But the benefit of that is that you are never going to be fired. It was expected that once you had that job, you would never ever be fired. And that's exactly what we see in Ton. Ton is told by the new company's CEO, Himuro, who's this younger, more ambitious character, that he needs to downsize his department. And this is something he wrestles with. Like, Ton perfectly encapsulates the negative and positive of the pre-economy bubble way of thinking, because he returns saying that he's not going to fire anyone. He literally turns in a blank piece of paper of who he was supposed to fire, and he said that he never had to fire anyone before the bubble or after the bubble. Despite the fact that he's power harassed so many different people, let's go specifically, he never ever once believed that he would ever fire anyone. But the thing is that that's just not how business is done anymore. It's very much a hiring, firing process based on what employees are able to do. So as punishment, Ton is placed into a literal shed under the Career Experience Design Department, and he's classified as a volatile and outdated model of Japanese office culture. So again, like I said, this is a swing back around. We started this series off as, oh, well, the old ways of thinking in a Japanese office, they're outdated, it's full of pawahara, it needs to be replaced. But then the show is like, this is what happens when it gets replaced. When things are more modernized, it becomes more cutthroat. So there is actually some validity in the old office ways of thinking, because that's starting to hit other characters. After Ton is basically exiled, now we have Kabai, who's being stretched between her life as a mother and her work life. She's not able to devote her entire life to her job, which is the, quote, more progressive ways of office culture. Where, on the flip side, Ton, despite how much of a jerk he was, he absolutely would step in and say, oh no, go take care of your kid, where now it's completely turned around. It's like you've got people higher up saying, well, can't someone else come get your sick kid from school? And the answer is no. It notes the problem of overly aggressive progressiveness. And then we got season 5, and oh my god, I still to this day say that season 5 is just the best when it comes to commentary. And I know that doesn't make any sense, but hear me out. So at the very beginning, it's really simple, it's really basic. It's commentary about being responsible for your time. And that actually hit me really hard as an independent worker. Like, I don't have anybody who tells me what to do. I have to schedule out everything I'm going to do. I have to think of my topics. I have to record. I have to edit. I have to find assets. I have to do all these things. And it's very, very, very easy to procrastinate on all of those things. So that hit me pretty hard. But it's also kind of interesting because not once, but twice has this show now talked about the dangers of gacha culture. Back in Season 3, Episode 1, we've got Netsuko, who is over-obsessing over this romantic game that is constantly hitting microtransaction after microtransaction because there is a hole left in her heart because she no longer has her relationship anymore. And now in Season 5, we have Haida, who doesn't have a job anymore and is filling that hole in his heart with games and gacha and things like that. So I'm actually kind of glad they brought back that warning because, Lord have mercy, gacha has become a globalized problem at this point. But no, we get to Shikabane, and I had no idea that this show was going to do this, and I'm so glad they did. She is a massive commentary on the massive homeless problem in Japan. In fact, my buddy Nobita, aka the Japan Reporter, has actually interviewed multiple people who have been living in net cafes. Many of them are very young, because these are young people who are unable to find work because of this 30 years of stagnated economy, or they're suffering from poor family life, or they're suffering from mental illnesses, and these are things that are not being addressed in Japan. So again, I know people say that Season 5 has a pacing problem, but they bring up so many important critical things that are going on in Japan that need to be addressed. And it's really interesting too, because the show could have just stopped there, but man, it kept going. Because through this character, the show is highlighting the apathy that younger people have with the future, and boy howdy does that get really important at the end of Season 5. But now we kind of do this weird hard right turn into politics, and this is where I've seen the most people complain, and I get it, but y'all gotta understand, this is so important. The fact that the show ends on politics is so important. I'll explain why in a minute. So you've got this character, Ikari, who's trying to get Netsuko into the rage party when it comes to the Japanese government, and you're sitting here thinking to yourself, what does that have to do with anything? And I'm like, oh my god, it's got everything to do with everything! Because the thing is, Ikari and his desire to get Netsuko into politics is commentary on the hidden yet utter frustration and rage that the public, especially the young public, has with politics in Japan. And then we're introduced to the concept of, well, we've got a bunch of old politicians that aren't going to change it, because we've got Haida's father and brother Jiro. They are social commentary on the status quo that politicians are still pushing to keep. They either are unable to get out of the bubble mindset, thinking that the old ways of doing things is what's going to get Japan back on its feet and that anything else is just going to ruin the country, which is the commentary case of Haida's father, or you have younger politicians who are being pressured by the older politicians to keep power in the hands of the powerfuls. That's what Jiro represents. And then you've got that massive final speech between Jiro and Netsuko, between the old ways of thinking and the new way of thinking, the new anger where people are just so freaking frustrated with all these problems in Japan. And everything is capped off with that final performance with Netsuko raging and stirring in the internalized rage of the people by being openly honest about everything that is problematic with her life and life in Japan. And then it all just turns out that Netsuko lost by a landslide to Jiro anyway, so what was the point? That was something that people were complaining about. The point is that Netsuko specifically points out that there was a 75% turnout for voting. All right? Japan's average voter turnout these days is 50%. 50%. It is currently the lowest in history since the post-war era. Young people are so disenfranchised in Japan by the government and their own futures that they have given up. They have internalized all of their anger because they know they just can't do anything about it, because you've got all these old farts in power who are not changing anything, who don't care about changing anything, because all they care about is being in office. And guess who's gonna put them in office and keep them in office? Old people. What do old people care about? Them staying alive. What do young people care about? Their future. But it doesn't matter, because Japan's population density is so screwed up with its age demographics that there are so many old people that the politicians are going to placate to the older people, and the older people are going to keep them in office. Do you understand why this is so important? And the other point that Netsuko points out very, very specifically is that there are a lot of people that came to see her speech / performance who were homeless. They didn't get to vote. Thus, the show is making even more social commentary that the people who are suffering the most, in a lot of cases, are not allowed to vote in the people who will make those things better for them. This series had to end with politics in its story because politics are the one and only thing that's gonna fix all these problems that this show spent 5 seasons bringing up. Everything from the minute, the power hada, the problem with the new ways of doing business and how that's still corrupt, the problem with the homelessness, the problem with employment, all these things. Nothing's gonna change until politics do something about it. And here's the thing that kills me the most, because this was also a massive complaint that people had. People were so upset that in the end, the series wraps up the exact same way it started. Even between seasons, everything went back to a status quo. But in this particular point in the show at the very end, Netsuko is trapped in the same overcrowded train that she was at the very beginning, getting knocked around, stepped on, and talking about the flashing lights of the people's rage in the darkness. The series ends the way it began, and everything goes back to the status quo because Japan has yet to change. The whole idea behind Aggretsuko, the whole idea of this tiny little minute character getting super ragey and super intense because she just cannot stand life's problems anymore. That's everything in this show, because all the while, this series highlights each individual problem and has commentary for all these issues in Japan, and then it pushes for Japan as a society to get so pissed off that people actually do something about all these problems. That's why this series ended the way that it did, and why it bothers me so much when people are like, oh, I think that the show completely fell apart. You missed the whole point! The whole point is social commentary about fixing in Japan! Like, when people are saying, oh, the series got way too weird with the idol thing, and what was up with the politics, and why was everything going back to a status quo? It has to go back to a status quo, because that's how social commentary works. That's like being pissed off that early South Park went back to a status quo. It had to, because it's commentary. God, the one thing that I kept seeing was that, oh, well, there was no grandiose ceremony between Haida and Netsuko to get married, and I'm like, man, you really should check out how marriages are seeming to go in Japan, because that is also social commentary. There are a lot of couples getting married that don't have big fancy ceremonies. I've got Japanese friends there who did that exact same thing. Tomo and Hutch did that. Why? Maybe there's problems with the family. Maybe there's problems with money. Things are changing. That's the whole point. Things need to change. The point of this show is that there are so many people who are so angry, they are so tired, and they just want things to change. The whole show spent so much time explaining what all of the problems, modern sociological problems in Japan are, and at the very end, these are the ways that have to be done to fix it. And they're still not being done to fix. The reason why Cheeto won is because the show is saying that nothing is still changing. The reason why everything goes back to the status quo is because nothing's changing. Something must change in Japan, and that, everyone, is the point of Aggretsuko. Thank you for watching, everyone. I am going to get some water and lie down. I am also going to be working on a cultural breakdown of Gyarados from Pokemon, as well as a Witch Ninja on Tengen Uzui, because I have a lot to say about that guy. I'm coming down. So thank you for watching, and until next time, this is Gaijin Goombah, signing out.